Preface. In October 1948, I attended my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was singularly unimpressed. In fact, I was so unimpressed that I would not have returned except for the fact that they wouldn't let me put any money in the hat, and I wanted to know more about an organization that wouldn't take my money. Since that time, I have attended many AA meetings and met many alcoholics, both practicing and recovering. Most of the information in this book has been gleaned from those meetings. These people have been most patient with me, teaching me and guiding me to understand this baffling disease. These are the only people who understand it. Alcoholics are the only real experts. These early days were lonely ones, both for the alcoholic and for those who would help the alcoholic, but the lonely days are over, and we have, until recently, been surrounded by an exploding treatment and research complex that has threatened to overwhelm us. It has been chic to be concerned with alcoholism, but we know the alcoholic is still alone. This small book, then, is an effort to call our wandering attention back to the reason we started all these activities in the first place, the suffering alcoholic. Robert C. Hickle, M.A. How alcoholism progresses. I am impressed by the progressive nature of alcoholism. We are all aware that the disease progresses while the alcoholic is drinking. The evidence is obvious. There seem to be more and more people agreeing that the disease proceeds to get worse even when the alcoholic has stopped drinking. When they return to drinking after a period of sobriety, they don't return to the old successful drinking, nor do they return to the level of aberrant drinking which they had reached when they had stopped. Instead, the drinker starts at the point they would have reached had they continued drinking. If this is true, it has some fascinating implications. Ignorant for the moment the possibility that alcohol did make them cross the line from social drinking to alcoholism, it appears that the progress of the disease may be dependent of the use of alcohol. It would be powerful evidence of the genetic predisposition toward alcoholism. If the progress of the disease is independent of the use of alcohol, is it possible that a person could be an alcoholic all of one's life with the disease progressing along as one grows older, and one would never know it unless one took a drink? I am unaware of any studies that would identify alcoholics who started drinking, say, in their 40s, and would discover whether they started in the early stages of alcoholism or if they really started in the later stages of alcoholism. A little glimpse of this possibility is shown in the limited studies of alcoholism among the elderly. There seemed to be evidence that many of them did not have a drinking problem until they got old. It would be interesting to find out when they began drinking. Reasons for drinking. I believe that alcoholics and social drinkers drink for the same reasons. The difference seems to be what happens after they start drinking. Examine the reasons social drinkers give for drinking: to be part of the crowd, peer pressure; to enjoy oneself, enhancement of feelings; to drown one's sorrow, relief drinking; to temporarily escape from life's problems, fantasy drinking; to deal with personal problems, escape drinking; to heal the effects of a previous drinking bout, or to alleviate the pain or illness, medicinal drinking. Alcoholics drink for all these reasons. In fact, a very careful examination of this fact leads to the idea that there is no clear demarcation line between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. No one has ever been able to discover that line. It is possible that there is no such line and that the whole process of beginning drinking, social drinking, and alcoholism is a smooth continuum with no interruptions. This would explain why we cannot find a line of demarcation. There isn't any. The decision to quit and the drink. Paradoxically, it appears that the alcoholic decides to quit drinking while still drinking. Not the usual Monday morning, "I'll never take a drink as long as I live" decision, but the surrender necessary to find real sobriety. The corollary decision to resume drinking or relapse after a period of sobriety is made while not drinking, and then they seek a way to justify beginning again. Since one decision is made while sober and one while drinking, it may be that alcohol has little or nothing to do with the decision making in this regard. One might say that the pain of drinking makes one decision possible, and the pain of not drinking makes the decision to begin again possible. Dealing with the tensions of sobriety. Is it any wonder the alcoholic finds it difficult to stop drinking? First, they seem to be more sensitive to psychic pain and tension than the average person. Second, they have learned a way to deal with that pain and tension using alcohol. Now we ask them to change their lives, to experience the pain. Change itself is painful and tension-producing, so we are asking them to deal with this tension-producing change in their lives, quitting without the means that they have always used to deal with the tension. This is an interesting paradox. What is more natural than to drink to deal with the tension produced by not drinking? It's a harsh road we ask the alcoholic to follow to recovery. Is it any wonder that some take a detour? Sober and in trouble. I have observed that many times alcoholics have terrible things happen to them shortly after they start living sober lives. These are many times physical accidents such as falling off porches, getting knocked down by horses, getting hurt on the job, getting hit by cars, etc. In fact, I have seen it so often that I sometimes warn alcoholics who are starting to reshape their lives to be careful. I suppose it all could be coincidental, but it seems real. There are several interesting explanations. One is that there really is no difference in what is happening to them, but while they were drinking, they could use alcohol for the pain of injuries while continuing to function. They just felt these things were part of life. Then suddenly everyone tells them how great it's going to be, and it isn't. There are also some Freudian explanations. I have heard alcoholics say that they couldn't stand success. By the time they quit drinking, they're feeling unworthy. They can't go back to drinking to prove how rotten they are, so they get hurt or make poor investments or do something else foolish. It could also be the grandiose things that alcoholics appear to do when they get sober. They get into trouble because they break a lot of new ground, trying to make up for all the ground they lost when they were drinking. Another explanation has occurred to me, but I don't know just how to put it. Experienced alcoholics get very cunning and careful. They move slowly, drive slowly, and many times learn to compensate for their fuzziness and lack of coordination. Now that they are sober, they decide that all that caution is unnecessary, so let her rip, and they break a leg, getting to the heart of the matter. It is interesting, if futile, exercise to try to peel off layer by layer the incredibly complex mechanism of alcoholism. I'm not sure whether this exercise is best compared with peeling off the layers of an imperfect pearl to get the perfect pearl underneath, or with peeling an onion. The onion works best because sometimes you weep. In both cases, you may get done peeling and find that you have nothing to show for your efforts except peelings and tears. We see alcoholism first as a behavior problem. That is, the behavior of alcoholics when they drink. Probably what we see first are the consequences of their drinking, their lack of judgment, and their indifference to anything except drinking. Peel off a layer, and we see that these consequences are caused by their behavior, aberrant drinking. Now we are getting somewhere. Their drinking causes their problems. But if we are at all perceptive, we must ask the question, why do they drink in this manner? Many of our researchers get stopped at this layer and spend their time and funds researching what is only a minor layer in the system. The way we peel this layer is to recognize that whatever we or the alcoholic attribute to their drinking, two things become obvious. First, non-alcoholics drink for the same reason. And second, most people do not use alcohol to deal with life. Now we come to a layer that will get us tangled in a sort of circular reasoning if we're not careful. Now, this layer is one we perceive as alcoholic drinking to deal with the effects of drinking. If we accept this as what it appears to be, we go back to go without collecting $200. We're back to that first layer again, and we see their problem as the consequences of drinking. If, however, we avoid this pitfall, we can see their drinking as a way of dealing with drinking as a part of the larger picture. Now, that is, drinking as a way of dealing with or adjusting to life in general. Up until now, the layers have been obvious and rather easily removed. But I don't think we have reached the core yet. We must ask ourselves, why had the alcoholic learned to deal with life, including the effect of drinking, in this manner? This is not the same question we asked a while ago because we're several layers deeper now. There are two explanations advanced at this level: physical allergy and psychological dependence. Currently, I am unaware of any real evidence that the alcoholic is any different physically than anyone else. The second item, psychological dependency, is not so easily disposed of. This factor seems to be present in most alcoholic families, but it is also present in many non-alcoholic ones. It often seems to occur early in the disease of alcoholism, but is not an unfailing symptom of this disease. It is a learned response to alcohol, but still occurs before drinking. It is only if we keep our eyes firmly on the fact that alcoholism is unique only because of what happens to the alcoholic after the alcoholic starts to drink, we can dispose of psychological dependency as just one more layer. Having disposed of this rather difficult layer, we move to the next. This layer involves what happens to alcoholics when they take the first drink of their life. Many alcoholics say they were alcoholics from the time they took their first drink, that alcohol did something to them, or more properly, for them that it didn't seem to do for others. I think this is worthy of examination. Let's go back 2 layers and try to find out why, but stay single-mindedly in pursuit of what. What happens? How do they describe it? As Thomas Wolfe, an alcoholic, describes his first drink in Look Homeward, Angel, it is almost a mystical experience. Suddenly everything became clear. The secrets of God and man are suddenly revealed. Right here, we must describe that some alcoholics describe their drinking as a search for God. It is easy to dismiss this as alcoholic hyperbole, but one is reminded of a generation tripping on chemicals as they sought a religious experience, or maybe more properly, a spiritual experience. I do see a tie-in between this spiritual experience and the insistence of AA that the alcoholic recognizes a higher power. Surely, while alcoholics are drinking, the bottle is their higher power, and while it is a little difficult to see the red-faced drunk as one who is reaching for a spiritual experience, it cannot be dismissed altogether. Then, is the center, the alcoholic's use of alcohol to attain a spiritual harmony, only to be robbed and diluted? I think not, but I think we are getting close to the germ and the core. At this time, I cannot see beyond this layer. The cork in the bottle syndrome 1. One of the most difficult forms of resistance to overcome in helping alcoholics is the cork in the bottle syndrome. They come to see that alcohol is their problem, and therefore they will simply stop drinking. Everyone is after them because of their drinking, and therefore they will simply stop. Now no one can say they have a drinking problem. They don't drink now. Well, the pitfalls of this approach are obvious and many. Everyone has told them their problem was drinking, so they stopped. They still have all the problems they had when drinking, except those of drinking, such as hangovers. But their other problems, such as a shortage of money, a spouse who doesn't understand them, and a boss who doesn't appreciate them, well, those problems, they still exist. All they have done is simply deprive themselves of the way they always have dealt with problems, and there they are, naked to the cruel winds of the world. They know where there is a shelter from these winds, so they inevitably take the cork out of the bottle. Then the next time someone talks to them about their drinking problem, they are fully convinced that it isn't alcohol because they gave that up once and it didn't solve a thing. The cork in the bottle syndrome, too. Here we've got one of the toughest forms of resistance to deal with. It is also of such a nature that it is bound to create some self-doubts in the mind of the counselor if it continues long enough. Okay, I've got a drinking problem. Since drinking is my problem, well, I'll just quit. Even you can't deny that will solve it. Sometimes this is very easy to deal with. Just wait a week or two and the cork comes out of the bottle. Then if the alcoholic shows up again, you can start over. Many times you won't see them again for a long time, if ever. But suppose the cork stays in the bottle for an extended period, like 6 months. The alcoholic and many times their family can see no reason for continuing therapy. If they don't drink, well, there's no problem. And they don't drink. Here the counselor gets into trouble. One reasoning does something like this. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this person wasn't really an alcoholic. Their lives seem to be straightening out, and there aren't any dry drunks. Maybe just drinking was the problem. And then the hooker. If they aren't alcoholics, maybe they can return to successful social drinking. Now, if the counselor can get led down this road, what chance has an alcoholic got? I guess there is no solution to this type of resistance except patience. Even that often fails. Love. Somewhere in the lives of nearly every recovering alcoholic, we find a person who really has convinced the alcoholic that they care about them. Strangely, it is seldom a spouse or a child, a parent or a brother or sister, but usually someone outside the family. Many times it's a person whom the alcoholic did not know at all when they were drinking. AA refers to these persons as the alcoholic's sponsor. As this relationship ripens, it becomes most unusual. First, there is a positive identification that attributes sponsor with all the qualities necessary for the definition. They can do no wrong, say nothing wrong, and the sponsorees hang on every word. But contrary to the usual pattern of counseling, as the alcoholics grow toward maturity in their sobriety, they do not go through a negative identification. They become less and less reliant on the sponsor and may see them less and less. However, the bond stays strong, and even if the alcoholic finds a quality of sobriety that lets them go it alone, they still have this rich, satisfying relationship. This relationship is one of the purest forms of love. The sponsor has no axe to grind, nothing to gain except to strengthen their own sobriety, and nothing to motivate them except that they really care. There is no way to fake the feeling, and the alcoholics, who always have their antennae out, will run like a thief from any pretense. The alcoholics have a battered, damaged, nearly destroyed feeling of self-worth. The fact that someone loves them enough to care stuns them at first, and then bolsters them to where they can begin to look around for sobriety. If they cannot accept the fact that their sponsor really cares enough, their chances of sobriety are poor. Psychic pain. It appears that there is as wide a difference in the ability to stand psychic pain as there is to stand physical pain. There are people who will hardly let the dentist look in their mouth without an anesthetic, and yet a friend of mine pulled his teeth with a pair of pliers. I believe alcoholics have a very low tolerance for physical pain. All life is painful, and everyone has some painful spots and moments in their lives. Alcoholics seem to learn rather quickly that the use of alcohol alleviates physical pain. Rather than learning other adaptive mechanisms for the alleviation of psychic pain, they lean on alcohol. When they reach a place where the pain caused by using alcohol is greater than the pain it numbs, the use of alcohol may be perceived by the alcoholic as counterproductive, and they may search for other means of dealing with the pain of life. This may be one of the reasons why the decision to stop drinking is finally made. Fear. One of the characteristics of the disease of alcoholism seems to be fear. It is most difficult to get alcoholics to admit this fear because I think many times they do not perceive it as fear. Alcoholics, like the rest of us, think that to feel fear, we must be afraid of something. So they feel this disturbing emotion and desperately try to think what it is that they are afraid of. They could remove the offending source if only they knew what it was. Psychologists call this emotion undifferentiated fear. That is, fear without a cause. Psychiatrists like the word anxiety. Whatever it is, alcoholics feel it tremendously, and much of the feeling of euphoria that accompanies early sobriety seems to be caused by the absence of that fear. Now, it is sometimes difficult to get to the nature of that fear while talking to alcoholics. They admit to the emotion, but like to attach it to something. They're afraid of what they did during their blackout, and they are afraid to go to work after their umpteenth unexcused absence. It's only after they see themselves well into the middle stages of recovery that they can see this feeling for what it is: fear. The Bible tells us that perfect love casts out fear. The insulated alcoholic. There is a population of alcoholics who we are doing a very poor job reaching. This is the group that is protected by some unique condition in their environment from the consequences of their drinking. The group would have to include many professionals, people who travel a lot, prominent members of the community, celebrities, people who don't have to be accountable for their time, like writers or painters, for example, executives, and women. These people are protected by their money, their position, by their secretaries, by their families, and by the nature of their jobs, from the consequences of their drinking. There is money to pay the fines and smooth feelings. There is the dignity of the company to be protected. There is position and status that cannot be called into question, and so the alcoholic is protected. They are literally protected to death. Many times the insulation is so effective that the alcoholics literally die drunk without any real effort being made to help them. They may die in a car accident, go to sleep in their garage with the car motor running, commit suicide, or die of cirrhosis. But they're protected to death by the very people who should be helping them to sobriety and health. Loneliness. I think most everyone in the business has heard alcoholism called the lonely disease, but I have never heard anyone really examine what loneliness is. There are many words that will describe in part what the alcoholic feels, such as estrangement and alienation, but loneliness probably fits best. First, the alcoholic is lonely because of the intensely personal nature of the illness. The illness, treating the illness with alcohol, suffering the agony of the consequences, the bewildering search for a better way, the repeated resolutions to be different, and the repeated surrender to worse and worse cycles of drinking and sobriety are so intimate that they can't be shared with anyone. The second kind of loneliness I see is estrangement from one's loved ones. They cannot understand alcoholics. All they can do is see the alcoholic's behavior from their frame of reference, and so they cannot share with them. At first, they'll try to explain and reason, but finally withdraw and shut loved ones out. If they can't understand, why should the alcoholic try to tell them? Third, I see the communion with alcohol as a gradual and sure substitute for any type of rewarding relationship. Alcohol is always rewarding, is always the same, and always delivers, not like friends who have their own problems to deal with. Later, of course, alcohol creates problems as it solves others temporarily, but by then, the pattern of substitution is formed, and there is no way back. Last, I see the loneliness of the alcoholic as an alienation from God. Alcoholic drinking can many times be seen as a search for something, and I see it, at least in part, as a search for something to fill the aching loneliness which comes from a failure to find spiritual solace. The cosmic loneliness of the person who feels one must go alone through this overwhelming business of living. If one looks at these explanations of loneliness, it's not hard to see how the AA program meets almost every requirement to deal with the loneliness of alcoholism. Denial. The denial mechanism of the alcoholic is a strange and wonderful thing. It reaches far beyond the simple statement, "I don't have a drinking problem," to all sorts of behavior calculated to reinforce denial. Everyone is familiar with the simpler denial. My family never suffered because of my drinking. I still have the same job I've had for 22 years. I have never been laid off from work because of my drinking. I have never been arrested. I don't drink in the morning. I never miss a meal because of drinking. I'm not that bad yet. And so on ad nauseum. But some denial is much more subtle. I think the classic of the behavior of which I write about and talk about here is the poor, old, late chronic Skid Row, teeth gone, too weak, beard dirty, tattered, who has a dirty, twisted necktie tied around his neck. It makes you want to cry. I sometimes think what we call the grandiose behavior of the alcoholic a denial. I can't be an alcoholic if I drive a Continental or Lexus. But to go on, I know an alcoholic whose denial is to shave every day. He endangers his life by doing so and has cuts all over his face. But he shaves nonetheless. And no one knows, like the spouse of the alcoholic, the necessity of having clean clothes, sometimes several times a day. The best way to see this mechanism working is to observe the alcoholic coming off the drunk. Shave, clean clothes, bathes, mouthwash, deodorant, shoe shine, carefully combed hair, the whole Beau Brummel bit. See how nice I look? I can't have a drinking problem. And the efforts are so futile and tragic that one wonders at the full extent possible of self-deception. Testing. There is a phenomenon that I have observed often enough to believe it's significant. It is called testing the counselor, or sponsor, or program, or AA. The phenomenon is the slip that occurs shortly after the alcoholic gets a real glimpse of the possibility of staying sober. So many alcoholics seem to have one more drunk after they start the program that it is interesting to speculate why. I could see two reasons for testing. For many years, the alcoholic has been manipulating the people around them in this manner. They tell themselves and everyone around them that they drink because their spouse nags them all the time. They manipulate the spouse in such a manner as to make them nag, thus proving their thesis and giving them a reason to continue drinking. Now they find in the counselor or sponsor someone they cannot manipulate. No matter how badly they are treated, they don't nag. As one more effort to justify continuing to drink, they get drunk. This has always brought real disapproval on them in the past and allowed their self-fulfilling prophecy to come true. When they find no punitive response to the last drunk, they are stripped of one more excuse to drink. The second reason for testing is that they can't believe that this relative stranger really cares about them. There is more to this than meets the eye. They feel they can strip away the pretense of this person and get right down to business. Once again, when the counselor refuses to be manipulated by the strongest weapon the alcoholics have in their arsenals, the alcoholics may be forced to the reluctant conclusion that the counselor really cares and thus open themselves to the necessary relationship to attain sobriety. The crisis. There is so much talk about creating a crisis in the alcoholic's life to bring them face to face with the reality of their illness. So, the theory goes, we don't wait until there is a natural homegrown crisis available to confront the alcoholic with reality. We create one. One of the accepted methods is for the spouse to leave. Another is for the employer to threaten termination. Since these are crises that would eventually occur anyway, so the reasoning goes, we bring them on earlier, confront the alcoholic earlier, and thus bring about earlier recovery. I don't have any argument with this theory, really. I have observed a reaction, however, which is counterproductive and which is very difficult to deal with. To go back a moment, we insist that alcoholics recover for themselves and not for someone else. That means we must get them to focus their attention on themselves. As every counselor knows, this is difficult and it's part of the denial mechanism. If they recover for others, then they are free to return to drinking as soon as those others fail to respond to the alcoholic's sobriety in the manner that the alcoholic thinks are appropriate. Now it seems to me that there is a difference between the induced crisis and the one that comes in the natural course of events. It's not that those alcoholics feel the induced crisis any less credible than the other, but their participation has not been so extensive. They are not bruised and battered and prepared for the knockout punch. Every fighter knows that a boxer in good condition and rested can take a much harder punch than the same person can later in the fight. So it is with the alcoholic. They have not gone through the necessary softening up, and all they want to do is get their family or job back. They find it hard to understand why they should think about themselves when all they must do is quit to solve their problems. Their sobriety is apt not to be of any lasting quality if they do not concentrate on themselves during the recovery process. The impulsive drink. I don't believe there is such a thing as an impulsive drink, although most alcoholics insist that there is. Just as it takes a lot of preparation for the alcoholic to quit drinking, I am confident that the same amount of preparation goes into returning to drinking. The classic case that I have observed was L. Let's call this person L. He didn't begin drinking until he was 19, but became an alcoholic very quickly. He found sobriety through AA and was sober for 12 years. It took him several years before he could complete the preparation to return to drinking. He was a pretty good carpenter and made considerable money on the side, building birdhouses and picnic tables. In addition, he had a good job, his family was content, and there was no way he could return to drinking. First, he quit his regular job as a welder. It didn't appear that there would be enough market for his services in carpentry, but there was. He was an excellent workman, and almost despite himself, he made a good living as a carpenter. This wouldn't serve his purpose, and he couldn't bring himself to do poor work. His solution was to delay, procrastinate, and not make deliveries on time, not keep his promises, etc. So he finally got to where he couldn't make a living as a carpenter. Now, his bills piled up, his wife nagged him, his children wanted more money, pressures increased. One day, he took that impulsive drink. 2 years after he started to get ready to do so. It was only in the latter stages of his sobriety, when the first drink drew near, that he quit going to AA. Just as the seed which is planted can bring sobriety much later, I believe the seed of the slip is also planted, fertilized, nourished, and tended until they produce the desired result, the impulsive drink. The quality of sobriety. Like the quality of mercy, the quality of sobriety is not strained. Sobriety comes in all qualities, and there seems to be an excellent correlation between the quality of sobriety and the length of sobriety. AA members recognize this quality of sobriety, even in themselves. Such epithets like stinkin' thinkin' and dry drunks are used to describe the mental condition of alcoholics who are not drinking now but are still filled with bitterness, resentments, anger, and the self-loathing which accompanied their drinking. Even the honeymoon effect of early sobriety cannot obscure this type of sobriety from the careful observer. There is a certain feverish, febrile air about alcoholics with inadequate sobriety which seems to be their way of hustling around and about without doing any of the painful rethinking that is necessary to maintain sobriety. I doubt the continuing sobriety of alcoholics who describe themselves as wanted to drink but holding off the devil with sheer willpower, or talking about the injustices of the world to them, or complaining that everyone has not fallen into line for them simply because they have stopped drinking. Alcoholics whom I think have their sobriety well assured are those who just can't wait to tell you all the good things that have happened to them lately. They may not seem like very big things to you, but seen through their eyes, they are wonderful. The best way to describe it is to say that those persons who have the best chance of success are those who feel good about their sobriety. They're great people when they're sober. They are great people when they're sober, but they're really rotten when they're drinking. Anyone who has been in the field of alcoholism for more than 3 days has heard some variation of this theme. We have come to understand well the personality change that commonly goes with alcoholic drinking. In fact, this is one of the most important clues that we use in diagnosing alcoholism. We understand the bad part all right, but I wonder if we have taken a good look at why they are nice when they are sober. I suspect that alcoholics include about the same mixture of good people and bad people as do the regular population. When practicing alcoholics are sober, they have a lot to make up for. They work extra hard to prove to the boss that their recent absenteeism has not lessened their value to the company. They are extra nice to their spouse because the spouse is on the verge of leaving. They go out of their way to be a good neighbor in the hope that the neighbor will forgive them for driving across their garden when they were drunk. They go out of their way to be nice to their friends because they don't really remember what happened at the party at their place. So, they come across as nice people now that they are sober. During the euphoria that follows initial sobriety, they are a paragon of virtue. No good deed is too difficult, and no price is too high to pay to convince everyone how grateful they are for their sobriety. There is nothing phony about this attitude. They are grateful. But the honeymoon comes to an end, and the reality of living comes home to roost. We discover that they are just like everyone else. They are not like they were between drunks when they were pathologically eager to please everyone, nor are they like they were in the first days and weeks of sobriety. They are just ordinary human beings, and we shouldn't expect them to be anything else. Alcohol and AA. Anyone who observes the effects of alcohol on its user, whether social drinkers or alcoholics, must be impressed by the ability of alcohol to live up to the drinker's expectations. It is a truism that when 5 people drink, one sings, one cries, one becomes violent, one wants to climb trees, and one thinks about sex. It's obvious that alcohol does not bring this about, but the expectations of the users. One can go on and say that alcohol not only meets the expectations of the users, but it also meets their needs. And here again, there is no difference between those who use alcohol in a socially acceptable manner and those who we feel abuse alcohol. If a person wants to be taller or shorter, thinner, fatter, wittier, more handsome or beautiful, richer, more talented, stronger, all they must do is resort to the bottle, and their needs are met. It is only when the coach turns back into a pumpkin at midnight that they discover that their needs have not really been met, and that they have only postponed facing reality. There is an interesting parallel, I think, with Alcoholics Anonymous. Ask any member of AA to describe it to you, and they will give you a coherent and well-organized description, but one which is very little like what another recovering alcoholic will give. Since they are talking about the same organization, what must be different are their perceptions. All alcoholics who find help in AA see in it what they want to see. One of the miracles of AA is that it seems to be infinitely variable to meet the infinitely variable needs of alcoholics. It may seem strange to say that alcohol and AA have a great deal in common, but they do. Both serve the needs of alcoholics, both live up to their expectations, both furnish a broad spectrum of experiences for the alcoholic, both require devotion and dedication that commits the alcoholic's whole life. The only difference I see is that alcohol turns on alcoholics and betrays them, while AA will see them through a happy and productive life. a selfish program. Recovering alcoholics like to talk about AA being a selfish program, and thus they give a layperson sort of a bad feeling about the program. I don't know what other word they might use, but I wish they could think of one. It is true that alcoholics can find sobriety only by seeking it for themselves. If they were doing it for others, they would have done so the first time they hurt a loved one because of drinking, or the first time they realized they endanger others when they drink and drive. Appeal to alcoholics to stop drinking for their loved ones invariably run into the denial mechanism. The problem is really not with me, their reasoning goes, but with those who bug me about my drinking. Therefore, any fallout that hits them from my drinking is really their fault, not mine. It is easy enough to see how this avoidance of the real facts allows the alcoholic to rationalize endlessly. Then, when do they decide to stop drinking for themselves? Surely it's not when their drinking becomes painful. Alcoholics continue to drink long after the law of diminishing returns has brought them to the point where drinking brings far more pain than it relieves. About all subsequent drinking can do is to relieve pain caused by drinking, leaving the original pain for which they drank still untouched. If one could see the alcoholic drinking as searching for something rather than an avoidance device, then one might get a glimpse of light. While the alcoholic shows to a great degree the human characteristic of repeating non-productive behavior, or even counterproductive behavior that was once productive, they seem to finally realize that the route they are following is leading them further and further away from that which they seek. Then and only then can they surrender and choose a new route that often does not prove productive. The Big Book. Anyone who is at all serious about the matter of alcoholism discovers quickly that Alcoholics Anonymous is an essential ingredient in any recovery program. Regular attendance at every AA meeting possibly helps to keep our perspective in a world of programs, grants, organizations, studies, publications, and all the impediments that spring up and around a problem when funds become available. Alcoholics Anonymous. The book can be read and reread, and each reading gives one an additional insight. My last rereading was not so much for content as it was an effort to absorb the feeling from these pioneers. The feeling was there, and two impressions emerged with overwhelming strength. One is the spiritual nature of the recovery program of AA, and the other is the impression that these alcoholics were alcoholics from the time they took their first drink. One can go to AA meetings regularly and go a long time between references to things of the spirit. If one does hear it mentioned, the reference is something like the spiritual part of the program or the spiritual side of the program. As a matter of fact, there is no spiritual part of the program. The program itself is spiritual. One can go through the 12 steps and delete the references to alcohol, and they have altered very little. But if one goes through the 12 steps and deletes the references to things of the spirit, there is very little left. Any counselor worth their salt looks for a personality change in an alcoholic who is recovering. This personality change is a result of surrender on the part of the alcoholic and a spiritual awakening. I think we're too timid very often when we talk about things of the spirit. As one reads the case histories of the alcoholics in the Big Book, one becomes aware that alcohol meant something very special to the alcoholic long before the symptoms of uncontrolled drinking occurred. In other words, alcohol meant more to the alcoholic from the moment they began to drink. The aberrant behavior that has come to be defined as alcoholism developed quickly in some and slowly in others, but they all liked what alcohol did for them from the very first. I think this observation is extremely important to those who would help alcoholics. If we are looking for early identification, here is a clue, and here lies one of the very basic problems of the treatment of alcoholism. Once alcoholics discover how special alcohol is for them, they are certainly not interested in giving it up. Even after it stops working for them, they try all the self-treatments possible to try to return to the time when alcohol did something for them rather than to them. It is only after they have been destroyed again and again that it even occurs to them that maybe they should quit. We must remember that alcoholics are seeking a way to continue drinking. The recovering spouse. We give a lot of lip service to the proposition that the spouse of an alcoholic is part of the problem, but I wonder if we really understand the extent of their involvement in the illness or their difficulty in adjusting to a sober alcoholic. First, other than the alcoholic themselves, we must recognize the fact that they were the first to know that their spouse had a drinking problem. They are the first to be hurt by their drinking, and they are the first to apply remedies to the situation. I don't suppose it would be possible to list all the remedies they tried, but in the beginning they included everything from drinking with the alcoholic to sexual to personal isolation. When they find that all their remedies fail and they hear ad nauseum that they are really the reason the alcoholic drinks, they usually become a severely ego-damaged person. Second, they become a key person in the system that enables the alcoholic to drink. They may feel that they are playing exactly the opposite role because when they find it, they destroy the booze. They clean out their pockets when there is any money in them and make the alcoholic's life a perfect hell with tears and recriminations. They are also the ones who call the boss to report their spouse ill with the flu, and they are the ones who fend off creditors. They are the ones who explain to the children that daddy or mommy is sick again and they'd better tiptoe about the house. Third, if they stay with the alcoholic, they work out an adjustment that enables the family to keep on operating after a fashion. They take considerable amount of pride in the fact that they operate on a reduced income, keep the children disciplined in school, keep a nice-looking home, keep themselves well-groomed, and manage to minimize the destructive effect of their spouse's drinking. Now comes sobriety. Suddenly, their whole carefully and painfully achieved adjustment goes out the window. Probably the first thing they become aware of is that their spouse is now a hero. They have gone from a kind of subhuman that was pathetic and hostile by turns, not to an ordinary person, but to some sort of demigod who is lauded by their employer, praised by AA members, and followed everywhere by their children. And since the alcoholic is by nature one of the world's greatest manipulators, they do nothing to minimize the halo effect. They may be just as hard to live with when they are sober as they were when they were drinking, although for different reasons. And thinks their spouse, just because they are going to work every day just like millions of others do without fanfare, this doesn't make them any kind of hero. There is probably more money to use, but since now the alcoholic tries to pay bills, there is probably precious little more for the spouse for new clothes than there was before drinking. At least then they had an excuse. John or Jane drinks, you know. Now they feel that everyone must think they are poor managers or just don't care. Now, too, their spouse comes around poking into things that they had ignored for years. How come little Freddie gets such lousy grades in school? And grandiose. Now that I'm sober, let's sell this rat trap and buy a decent house. Of course, they haven't fixed the broken front step yet, and a coat of paint would go a long way towards making it look a little less like a rat trap. No matter whether the recovering alcoholic is the husband or the wife, the circumstances are different, but the problems, well, they're the same. Putting some things together. When one sits down to do some heavyweight thinking about alcoholism, several things keep intruding, which have a disquieting effect. There are certain facts that don't seem to belong in any system that explain alcoholism, and the common remedy seems to be just ignore those facts. Well, I am going to propose a thesis that will deal with a number of those odd bits and pieces that are well ignored. The thesis I propose is that alcoholism, the disease, is a pre-existing factor or combination of factors that become evident using alcohol. The behavior syndrome that we call alcoholism is only a collection of symptoms of the disease. The real illness is something that has so far escaped the detection of everyone who has seriously searched for it. Just as we call the uncontrolled growth of body cells cancer, we call the loss of control over the use of alcohol alcoholism. In neither case do we really know what we're talking about. Item. Many alcoholics report that they think they were an alcoholic from the very first drink. I'm impressed that alcoholics know a great deal more about their disease than we have given them credit for and tend to believe what they tell me about the disease. Assuming this statement is true, there is no way that alcohol causes alcoholism. Alcohol activates the disease in such a way that is brought to our attention, but the behavior that we call alcoholism is simply a symptom of that disease. Item: when alcoholics return to drinking after a long period of sobriety, their disease seems to be worse than when they quit. This is a common observation of counselors who have seen certain alcoholics over a long period of time. Again, if this is true, then the progress of the disease seems to be independent of the continued consumption of alcohol. Item: we can't find the dividing line that separates social drinking from alcoholism. Well, as a matter of fact, there isn't any. These people we term alcoholics were, for a long or short time, classified as social drinkers simply because the symptom of their disease were not yet acute enough to become obvious. In other words, they've always been an alcoholic, but just didn't become sick enough for us to notice for some time. Item: people who don't start drinking until later in life are alcoholics discover that they have little or no time for symptom-free drinking. They seem to plunge head over heels into abusive drinking, and it seems to be the careful observer that the illness has already progressed a long way before they take the first drink. It follows that there must be people who have the disease from its earliest stages right on through its worst phases, but never know it because they never drink. They are very hard to tell from the recovered alcoholic. Item: some people seem to be social drinkers until they have a crisis in their lives. The death of a loved one, major surgery, or serious illness, or simply awareness of aging can be the cause. Once more, we see that alcohol plays only the role of causing symptoms that show. Item: alcoholics cannot return to social drinking. As a matter of fact, they never were social drinkers. Their disease was simply not severe enough in the early stages to show obvious symptoms. Item: we cannot find any difference between the reason alcoholics drink and the reason non-alcoholics drink. There aren't any. Only after the disease has progressed so far that the alcoholic drinks deal with the result of their drinking do we find a difference. These are simply symptoms of the late-stage alcoholic. It makes sense to me that alcoholism is a disease that exists independent of alcohol, but that requires the use of alcohol to make it have any harmful effect on a human being's life. The professionals on alcoholism. This is rather difficult to write about because anyone who makes claims of exclusiveness in the care and understanding of alcoholics will admit by doing so they don't know what they're talking about. We need every professional and every discipline to get the job done and should welcome all persons of goodwill who can help. But I do detect a change that may not altogether be for the good. For many years, most of the helping professionals dealt with alcoholics by ignoring them. True, the clergy prayed with them, the medical profession treated their cirrhosis and gastritis, psychiatrists helped look for reasons why they drink, sociologists look for social causes, law enforcement people put them in jail, but very few dealt with the physical, mental, and spiritual illness we call alcoholism. Those few who helped did so because they were empathic, caring people and not because of their orientation to a profession. This has changed. It has become almost fashionable to be interested in alcoholism, and I think it's important to note it's not particularly chic to be interested in the alcoholic. It may be unfair to also call attention to the fact that this ebb and flow of interest has largely paralleled the availability of money for programs and research. Whatever the cause, there has been a flood of those from every profession who would enter the field. They seem to have something in common. They are specialists in some limited area of human behavior, and the more specialized they are, the more limited their value is in truly helping the alcoholic. Almost universally, they neglect to recognize one fact they must recognize if they are to succeed. That fact is that alcoholism is unique. It's a unique disease. The treatment is unique, and the recovery is unique. But like that mythological Procrustes, they are busily sawing and stretching, trying to make this illness fit into their discipline, and the more specialized they are, the narrower the limits into which they try to force the suffering alcoholic. Some do succeed in helping alcoholics, but just like those who succeed before it became fashionable to deal with alcoholism, it is because they themselves recognize its unique nature and not because of their professional orientation. Each of us likes to feel that we possess a secret knowledge that we will share with only a few initiates. But the mystique is not there at all. The only thing that recovered alcoholics seem to have in common with each other is a caring person someplace in their recovery, usually not a person with close emotional or family ties. If professionals are those persons, they will succeed in helping the alcoholic recover. If they are not, it makes no difference at all what diploma, degree, certificate, or license hangs on their wall. Personal bias. To begin with, we usually use the word bias to describe the attitudes of those who disagree with us. It is exactly in that context that I intend to use it here. No matter what avenue I have used to pursue in seeking a solution to alcoholism problems, I run into an invisible wall. Since the wall is invisible, it's hard to put a name on it, and for want of a better word, I call it bias. This is the wall that both society and individuals erect to make sure that no one will get close enough to their own drinking to call it into question. At first, I thought this was a device used only by practicing alcoholics. The denial, hostility, and projection techniques of the alcoholics are most obviously a wall that prevents anyone from interfering with their carefully structured, alcohol-oriented method of dealing with life and its problems. Next, I observed this wall being erected by those who were not identifiable as alcoholics, but who deep in their heart of hearts were uncomfortable about their own drinking. The nature of this reason for the wall was harder to identify, but its presence could be felt in the vigor of the resistance. These persons resisted with vehemence, even a casual effort to intrude into their family, church, or business. An examination of the role played by alcohol in their lives indicated a threat to something. Also, one can observe this wall being erected by those who are apparently not suffering any ill effects from their drinking. Indeed, one could almost identify their drinking as productive, producing better business relationships, social interaction, enhanced feelings, producing all the nice things the purveyors of alcohol promise to deliver. Now, this last group's participation in wall building really gives one pause. Why should the people who are apparently getting all the benefits from drinking and suffering none of the problems resist with such enthusiasm any effort to tamper with the status quo? Several answers offer themselves. The most obvious is that they belong to one of the two preceding groups and are uneasy or afraid of their drinking and cannot countenance any interference with it. Another answer could be that these people really see alcohol as a means of adjustment in their lives and are afraid to give it up to seek other non-chemical means of adjustment. What would one substitute for the hospitality suite at a business convention? Or what would one do at a ritual drinking occasion, such as New Year's Eve, if no alcohol were used? Now, if this is true, don't we have at least psychological dependency on alcohol even in this group? The line of inquiry leads where I find my thinking so often leading that the dividing line between alcoholism and social drinking is far earlier than even the most critical observers have been willing to admit. In fact, I find myself wondering if there is any real line of demarcation between the most socially successful regular user of alcohol and the Skid Row alcoholic. This would account for the fact that no one has yet been able to find this line. To shift gears a little, I find society reacting strongly to any serious attempt to change its attitude toward alcohol, very much the same as the alcoholic does. This is the same hostility, the same resistance, the subtle denial, and the same unwillingness to admit that there is a problem that we find in the alcoholic. People who deal with alcoholics are amazed at the extent of the disasters that the alcoholic is willing to endure to continue drinking. Well, an acute observer of the passing scene must conclude that our society is also willing to endure untold disasters in death, suffering, sorrow, and expense to retain the privilege of drinking. We talk of raising the bottom of the alcoholics or creating a crisis to get them to treatment. I wonder what kind of crisis it would take to bring society to treatment. The socially acceptable drug. Sooner or later, most everyone in the business of dealing with alcoholics feels the utter frustration of arriving on the scene after the fact. It must be akin to the feeling of the surgeons who, time after time, are called upon to use painfully accumulated skills to deal with the results of automobile accidents. They must sometimes wonder if they could serve better by preventing accidents than by wading into the welter of broken bones and spurting blood to restore to use what is left of the patient. I think it is profitable to examine the effects of this frustration on counselors. They must use one or more of several methods of dealing with their frustration, or they will no longer be useful as therapists. One adjustment that I see is to accept the role of the prohibitionist. This is a simplistic answer and doesn't deal with the fact that alcohol is legal and will be legal for our lifetime. It is easy to say, if the world adopted my point of view, our problems would be solved. Since the world does not accept my point of view, I am therefore absolved of any necessity to think further on the problem. The second deal the counselor makes is the reasonable person approach. They drink openly, almost with bravado, to show they have no quarrel with a society that has given its blessing to the use of alcohol in most every situation. This approach is responsible for the wry spectacle of the wing of a hospital for alcoholics being open with a cocktail party, or the NIAAA holding a rip-roaring hour-and-a-half cocktail party at its Washington seminar. The third approach is to use the AA attitude, which is most useful for the organization but is really a cop-out for the counselor. The AA philosophy is to espouse no causes, to be neither wet nor dry, and to be interested only in the recovering alcoholic. Individuals using this method can very effectively erect a partition between the part of them that deals with lives being ruined using alcohol and a society that accepts alcohol as a necessary social concomitant. Another method of dealing with this frustration is the "it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness" approach. This lets counselors compare their efforts with the efforts of no effort, rather than trying to compare their efforts with the spectacle of a society remorselessly grinding out vast numbers of new alcoholics, even while the old alcoholics die in desperation. I guess there's nothing good or bad about any of these adjustments if they let the therapist continue to work effectively. It seems obvious that the vision of an uncaring society intent on its own bias toward alcohol, even while it suffers endlessly from the effects of alcohol, must call for some type of adjustment by those who deal with the wreckage from that bias. There is no such thing as a social drinker. I once heard a preacher say, "When you have taken one drink, you are one drink drunk." At that time, I dismissed it as rhetoric of a prohibitionist with no solution to the problem of alcoholism. But now I wonder. Most of the heavy thinkers in this field of alcoholism dismiss the social drinker as unrelated to the alcoholic, or at the very most, one who has taken the first step and may or may not eventually become an alcoholic. They search endlessly for the line that divides the social drinker from the alcoholic, and to the best of my knowledge, no one has found it. Like most of the things about alcoholism, the simpler we keep this, the easier and surer the solution. For the sake of simplicity, then, let's say there is no dividing line, but that social drinking and alcoholism are part of the same phenomenon. There are many things that seem to argue in favor of this conclusion. First, of course, is the one just mentioned. We like to talk of this dividing line as though it really exists, but if it does, we have done a poor job of finding it or even defining it. So in keeping with our drive for simplicity, let's say there is no such line. Now, we can explain a lot of things that have been unexplainable up until now. Take the fact that social drinkers and alcoholics seem to drink for about the same reasons. One might say that the social drinker never drinks to deal with the consequences of their previous drinking, but they do tend to deal with various sorts of unpleasantness, which is really the same thing. Alcoholics resist with a passion any effort to inquire into their drinking. Do you think the social drinker isn't angry when someone suggests there might be a more suitable way of having a good time at a party than using their drug of choice? Try suggesting that some group you deal with have their regular meeting without a social hour first. Alcoholics engage in some devious and sometimes transparent reasoning to be able to rationalize their continued drinking. Did you ever hear a social drinker say, "Sure, I'll take a drink if everyone else is having one too. I don't really care whether I have it or not, but I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings"? The longer one takes a look at this type of nonsense, The closer kinship one sees between reasoning of the social drinker and alcoholics who drink only because their spouse is on them all the time really isn't much of a difference, is there? Consider the amount of pain and distress that alcoholics are willing to undergo to continue drinking. To a bystander, the rewards of drinking are completely outweighed by the punishment they must undergo to continue. Now, is there really any difference between that and the amount of punishment that social drinkers are willing to take as members of society to protect its right to drink? We pay and pay through taxes, crimes, risk of getting killed or crippled on the highway by drunk drivers, pay for welfare, pay for prisons, police officers, pay insurance rates, higher insurance rates. But when efforts are made to reduce drinking, who is in the forefront to resist? Not the alcoholics. They are too deep in their own problems to do anything. But social drinkers, they fight for the right to keep paying this horrible toll just so they can continue to drink. If we look and look, we seem to be able to find only one way in which the alcoholic differs from the social drinker. That is the loss of control the alcoholics have over their drinking once they start to drink. But a closer examination makes one wonder at the validity of even that concept. This differentiation is important in the identification and treatment of those we have come to call alcoholics, but it won't stand up under the closest scrutiny. Let's think about it. It appears to me that this loss of control may not be the mysterious, instantaneous triggering of some physical or psychic mechanism that occurs only in those we call alcoholics. I see it as the same loss of critical judgment that we see in varying degrees among those who drink. It is even present in those who are one drink drunk. One has only to observe what we euphemistically call the social hour to see what happens. While there may be some alcoholics mixed in with these groups, they are mostly made up of those we call social drinkers. If you walk into a room when the social hour has just begun, the hum of conversation is low. People are talking about as they usually do, and there is no overt behavior that seems bizarre. Go in an hour later, and the volume of the sound has doubled or tripled. The room is full of red-faced, perspiring people shouting at each other just to be heard over the other shouts. If we listen to the conversation, the experts really aren't very expert, but they hold forth on their subject. The jokes aren't very funny, and they grow progressively more tasteless, but each one is greeted with a burst of raucous laughter. The middle-aged salesman of advertising novelties has become a hell rake with a lifted eyebrow for the ladies, and the frump with the teased hairdo has become a fatal charmer. Is this fantasy world any different than that in which the alcoholic lives? Are their personality changes any greater than those of the alcoholic who gives his wife boxing lessons when he's drinking? One is tempted to say that the difference is only one of degree, but I'm not even sure of that. The social drinker uses alcohol to fulfill unmet needs. So does the alcoholic. The needs are different, so the drinking behavior is different. It's that simple. An act of faith. I stand in my garden ready to plant peas. I have spaded it, raked it, fertilized it, and the calendar says today is the day to plant peas. I look at the pea seed in my hand, green, hard, wrinkled, and dry. No life of any kind shows. Yet if I want to raise a patch of peas, well, this is what I plant. I dig a trench, put the peas down, and cover them. My job is over. I can go fishing, watch TV, or sleep, but I cannot do anything to make that pea grow. The sun will shine, the ground will get warm, and the rain will fall. I have that faith. I can pull the weeds and chase off the rabbits, and I can help the rain with the garden hose, but nothing in the world I can do will make those peas grow, blossom, and bear. So it is with the alcoholic. We prepare the ground, plant the seed, and pull the weeds. But there is nothing we can do to make it grow. Just as with the peas, life lies within the alcoholic. We know we won't help any alcoholic if we don't plant the seed, but only God can make it grow. When we start giving instructions to God on how to make the seed grow, well, we are out of our field. That's God's. And when a seed doesn't sprout, that's God's too. Maybe another time, another growing season, it will sprout, or maybe it will never grow. It's not for us to say which shall grow and which not, any more than we can make any of them grow. Ours is to plant the seed. God's is to make it grow.